Matter of fact, we're going to get into it right now. I can't even play the whole song because what we have is a fantastic interview with a gentleman that has been in the news, but people haven't really heard too much from him. His name is Mike Raines. He's the attorney for former chief of police in Atwater, Sammy Joseph. A lot of people call him Sammy. Anyway, Mike is the attorney for Sam Joseph. We've seen his name in the paper. He was kind enough to come on the phone with me, and I recorded an interview, kind of doing a little backwards intro, but we are going to be talking to Mike Raines for the next hour, and we'll be back from 8 to 9 o'clock with some more original content, and then, of course, 9 to 9:30. That's right, the bonus 24 minutes of Citizen Watch. So much to talk about, and I'm sure people are going to find this interview very interesting. So we'll see you with some comment on this show in the 8 o'clock hour. All right, here we go. Folks, welcome to this week's edition of Citizen Watch. As you know, I've been on vacation the last couple of weeks. We've had some technical problems, but we are back. It's a new show. We're here December 15th, a couple of weeks before Christmas. This is the 6 a.m. hour. As you know, we have the 6 to 7 a.m. hour. Of course, Roger Wood is 7 to 8, and then, of course, I'm 8 to 9. And we also have a bonus half hour from 9 to 9:30. We hope you tune in for that. You know, one of the things that's been in the news, there's been a lot of things in the news with the election and such. And, of course, our little favorite city north of us, Atwater, has a new city council member. There was a lot of hoopla this last week with the swearing in, but the bottom line is it was just one new city council member on the council. Of course, James Vineyard decided not to rerun, and Jim Price, the mayor, was relieved of his mayoral duties, and Paul Creighton moved from the city council position, which he's in his first 4-year term, to the mayoral position. And the new position is Danny Ambrose over there on the city council. And, of course, there's been a lot of things going on in Atwater, and one of the big things is the chief of police, Sammy Joseph. As you know, he was put on paid administrative leave January 22nd, and that was about a year or so after he was promoted to the chief position by Frank Petro, who was the chief of police and was wearing a number of different hats, interim city manager, those sorts of things. As you know, Atwater has had a lot of issues. They're under the purview of the Joint Legislative Advisory Council, or the council there that's looking at all of their finances and that sort of thing. So they've got a lot of things coming up, and this putting Chief Joseph on leave was kind of a lot of people didn't understand it. You know, what did he do wrong? Why was he suddenly put on leave again by a new city manager that had just been in the position a couple of weeks? That was Art DeWerk. And again, they've had their share of city managers over there. This week on the phone, I have with me somebody who has been involved in this issue quite a while, and that is Sam Joseph's attorney, Mike Raines. And Mr. Raines has represented Sammy, I believe, throughout this. Is that true, Mike?
Yeah, pretty much from I was not his initial lawyer, but I took over fairly early on, just shortly after he was placed on administrative leave. I took over the case.
And Mike, if people don't know, has his own practice with a few other folks. It's Raines, Lucia, Stern, St. Phal, Silver, professional corporation. They have offices all over California, but Mike is in Pleasant Hill. Is that correct?
That's right, Casey.
And primarily you represent the law enforcement community, officers and that sort of thing, cities too, or a variety?
No, we have about 50 lawyers throughout the state of California that represent primarily police officers in criminal cases, administrative cases such as Chief Joseph, and civil cases throughout the state of California.
I see. So you've been doing this a while, I take it.
Well, I've been, after being a police officer in Santa Monica in the 1970s, I became a lawyer in 1980, and I've been representing police officers, literally now for 38 years.
That's quite some time. I know that, if folks know, on my show, I'm a reserve officer, have been with the city of San Diego for some time, and again, I've seen these things with officers getting the discipline, and sometimes these things are really drawn out, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, they can go on in some cases for years and years. Yeah.
So this really is just kind of starting out, folks. It's been happening since, again, Sammy was put on leave January 22nd. And as we found out recently, and I'm going to read just a little bit from the article in the Merced County Times, the Merced Sunstar was dated December 6th. Atwater's embattled Police Chief Samuel Joseph is no longer employed by the city. City Manager Lori Waterman confirmed on Monday. The police veteran of about 2 decades has been on leave since January 22nd, when then City Manager Art DeWerck was heading up the city. Joseph and the city severed ties on November 15th. The city is actively recruiting a full-time police chief and hope to have a new police chief in place by early next year, Waterman said. Citing personnel matters, City Attorney Doug White said he could not comment on the reason for Joseph's departure. The former chief's attorney, Michael Raines, could not immediately be reached for comment. Joseph's employment has been a point of contention ever since he was placed on leave, with his supporters often bashing city council members who voted to hire DeWerck, which were council members Creighton, Raymond, and Vieira. Joseph's departure also comes a week after an election that did not favor his supporters. Vocal supporter Dan Hernandez did not win his seat for the council, and Mayor Jim Price, whose past voting also supported Joseph, lost his bid for re-election against Mayor-elect Creighton. Councilman Vineyard, as we know, did not run for re-election, and Raymond won re-election. The day after Joseph was placed on leave, the Atwater POA took a vote of no confidence in the chief. The union has not released exactly how many officers were at the meeting or the specific number of officers who supported the vote. And again, this was the day after he was placed on leave. The advertisement on the city's website say applications to be the next police chief must be in by December 19th, which that's next Wednesday, folks, and says the position pays between $111,000 and $141,000 annually. As you know, they have interim chief Drew Bessinger. Before that, Armando Echeverria served as an interim chief. Months after Joseph was placed on leave, problems with the police department evidence room came to light when a letter from District Attorney Larry Morris surfaced. It informed area district attorneys that some evidence may be missing. The Sunstar has confirmed investigators believe the missing evidence may include guns, drugs, and cash. The Atwater Police Department shut down its evidence room pending completion of an investigation led by the California Department of Justice. That investigation is ongoing, according to officials. So again, we have on the phone Mike Raines, who is the attorney for Chief Joseph, and I really appreciate him being on the phone. It's very late, and I know that he's had a very busy day, and it's Christmas time of year, but I really think this is important to our listeners. As you know, I've covered the Atwater situation a lot. There's been a lot of different things with Scott McBride, certain things that were going on when Chief Petro was in charge over there, and you're bound to step on some toes. Chief Petro didn't have a real easy road ahead of him with the financial situation he was faced with, and I thought he did a good job keeping the Atwater Police Department viable during that time. One thing he did was promote Joseph to the chief's position, and he did that prior to the new city council being seated, and I think that may have upset some people. I just don't know why this has gone on. But is it true that Chief Joseph no longer has a job with the city of Atwater, Counselor?
Yes, that's absolutely true.
And what are his options at this point? Does he serve at will of the council? In other words, did they fire him correctly? What are his options at this point?
Well, Chief Joseph initially had an employment contract to be the chief, and that employment contract does contain language saying he's at will. But it also contains language that requires him to perform his duties in a capable manner, and indicates that if he doesn't perform them capably, they can fire him for cause.
Now,
what that means is that in all likelihood, he really wasn't an at-will employee. He was a permanent employee who could only be fired for cause, which means they have to offer reasons. They can't just summarily say goodbye. They have to offer reasons why they're firing him, and I think that is the situation from a legal standpoint.
My understanding of Chief Joseph, and again, I've had very good interactions with him in the public. What I've seen of him, he used to give reports at every council meeting of what was going on. He seemed to be well liked by the other staff members, by the other council members prior to all of this going on. And as I remember, his last performance review by then interim city manager John Bramble was exceptional. So there really wasn't any indication that he wasn't doing his job well before this, was there?
No, there absolutely has never been any question about the way he did his job. And when he came in as the chief, he did not make a lot of changes from what the prior chief had done. I mean, he maintained sort of the status quo. What changed was when he came in as the police chief, the then majority council decided that they wanted to bring in another chief. In all likelihood, of course, the husband of City Councilman Vieira, or City Council person Vieira. So the council majority hired Art DeWerck to be the interim city manager, and it was all a preconceived plan that Art DeWerck would place Sam Joseph on administrative leave, ostensibly because of a no-confidence vote by the association, and that they would then find some way to railroad him, fire him for some contrived reason, and therefore then hire Cindy Vieira's husband to be the police chief.
I know that with Art DeWerck, they had some missteps trying to get Art on board. There was a meeting that a few of the council members had at one of the local watering holes, and I guess it was observed by actually somebody on the department, and it threw into question the impartiality, i.e. a Brown Act violation, and the city had to kind of backpedal and go out and hire a headhunter and do a professional search for a city manager. And as you know, they've been through several city managers, and they finally came back to Art DeWerck. So what you're saying is the Art DeWerck hire was the meeting at with the council people. It looks as if they wanted to get to work in there all along. Oh,
sure. There was no doubt about it. This has all been an orchestrated attempt by the majority of the council then, who are still on the council, to bring in Art DeWerck, who would carry out the mission that they dictated. And, he did so dutifully, of course, until the background investigator that was foisted on the majority of the council. They didn't want this to happen, I'm sure, but Mr. Pietro, as he went out of office, had convinced them that they needed to do a background investigation for Mr. DeWerck because of his questionable ethics previously at his employment. And sure enough, when they hired a background investigator, the background investigator was the investigation was so damning on Mr. DeWerck, and they learned about it, at least verbally, from the background investigator at the moment, that, of course, Mr. DeWerck cleared out his office in the middle of the night and left town. And ever since then, the current city attorney has attempted at every turn to cover up and deceive the public about his lack of qualifications and the deceit and dishonesty that characterized his appointment.
Well, I know that when Mr. DeWerck was, when the meeting came to light, the out-of-chambers meeting, the potential Brown Act violation,
right.
He was gone out of the picture for a while, and when he came back around after Graham Mitchell left, I believe there was an interim, Lori was interim, and anyway, they brought Art in, and to quell the public sentiment that the questions that were out there, even Art DeWerck wanted this background check done, this post-level background check, because Art, as people know, had served in a law enforcement capacity in Ceres, correct?
Yes, he had, and I'm sure he wanted the background check done by somebody that they selected who would orchestrate the background check just like they wanted, because that's the rules they play by over there. They select the people that they know will tell the public and them what they want to hear. Art DeWerck did not want the investigation done, the background, by the guy who did it. And he assumed that they would choose somebody who would essentially cover up and do, the background investigation that would provide a favorable, recommendation of his employment. And lo and behold, they got somebody who was truly fair and objective, and Art DeWerck's background was called into question.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about that, there was a lot of money spent not only in this professional search for a city manager, but the money that was spent on this background check and the question of whether or not there's any work product. I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but do you feel there's a work product out there? Is there a background check out there that should be shared with the public?
Oh, well, heck yes, there's a background check out there that should be shared with the public. The question at this point is, did the city ever request the background investigator, once he indicated verbally the information he discovered about Mr. DeWork's background, did they ever want that to be put in writing? And of course the answer is no. They wanted it buried from the public and kept as far from the public as humanly possible, because it was so damning of Mr. DeWork and as well the council majority that hired him. But, the truth of the matter is there is a work product, and you know what it is? It is the verbal testimony of the background investigator that investigated Mr. DeWork and his hiring by this council majority. That's work product, and that's going to come in evidence when I conduct an appeal hearing for Chief Joseph, and we call that background investigator to testify.
One of the damning things that they tried to hang around Chief Joseph, and again, I'd like your opinion on this, was the evidence room.
Yeah.
And I know that Chief Joseph went away, was selected to go to Quantico, to the police, or to the FBI Academy, which I understand, and you maybe can clarify this as a former law enforcement officer, is quite an accolade to be invited to something like that.
Absolutely. Very few law enforcement officials go to the FBI Academy, and the ones that are generally considered to be the cream of the crop. And frankly, not all graduate with favorable results. Sam Joseph did. It's a tough academy, but, it instills, certainly in police managers, the importance of ethics, of professionalism, of the need to, be transparent to the public. And Sam was all part of that.
Well, one thing there's been a lot of innuendo around this evidence room, and it's my understanding there's a preliminary report from the Department of Justice, whatever state entity investigated this. I know that our own Sheriff Vern Warnke here in Merced County was tasked to look at it. He felt it was above his purview, but his initial blush there was something wrong. And I believe the mention was guns, drugs, and money, those three things, to the point where the district attorney wrote a letter to some of the defense people around here that there could be a problem. Now, this was months ago, and I know the information has been sporadic at best, and sometimes I have to look at what hasn't happened. I haven't seen any cases dismissed because of evidence being mishandled at the Atwater Police evidence room. I haven't seen any defense attorneys doing cartwheels because their clients are going to get off because there was a bad chief over there. As a lawyer, is that one way to look at this, that there isn't a problem with the Atwater police evidence room that Chief Joseph caused?
Well, yeah, that's certainly one way, and I'll certainly expound upon that in a minute. But the fact of the matter is, when Chief Joseph took over the chief, the evidence room had been operating in the same way for years and years. When he was a lieutenant, the evidence room operated in a certain way. They had an evidence room clerk that performed that duty for a while and continued to perform the duty. Before Chief Joseph ever became the chief, there was never, ever a complaint that evidence had been mishandled or was missing. And when he became the chief, he made no changes to the prior procedure that had never produced a complaint. While he served as chief, no complaints came to his attention at all.
Right.
Now, I can tell you right now, as a lawyer, that if there is evidence missing, if there is evidence mishandled, there is no question that that's going to come to the light of the police chief immediately, because when officers go to court, they can't find evidence. The DAs can't find evidence, and all of a sudden cases are being dismissed by the DA because no evidence is available because they can't find it. None of that happened. No. Not one case ever got dumped because of any mishandling of evidence before this claimed problem with the evidence room. And that's just another, scam engineered on the public to make people think that somehow Sam Joseph was involved in, or at least had something to do with missing evidence and the like. It's simply not true.
So as far as you know, there are no missing guns, drugs, or money, and some of these things that have been said by our own sheriff may not be true?
Well, I mean, that certainly isn't an allegation that the city leveled at Sam Joseph when they fired him. You would have thought that if they really had evidence of it, they would have made that as an allegation.
Well, that's true.
But, of course, they haven't done that because, of course, it's not true.
Yeah, and that really, I mean, that almost rises to a criminal thing if that was mishandled or something was done. I mean, these are very, very serious allegations, and this is why I'm glad that you're coming on and kind of clarifying some of these things, because we're really dealing with a man's reputation, a man's life, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And a man who's, been a law enforcement officer for over 2 decades and has been a member of the Atwater community for the same time, and who deserves a heck of a lot better than the way this council has treated him. Absolutely.
Well, that's what I can't really understand, Mr. Rains, is, Sammy has been with the department a long, long time. I say raised from a puppy. Chief Petro brought him along. He was always the spokesman at the city council meetings when Chief Petro was the city manager. And I thought that for Chief Petro, who had been in law enforcement a lot of years, would kind of know who he wanted to bring up. And so it was almost a slam to the former chief that his protege was doing all of these things that just were unbelievable. Evidence room problems, personnel problems, treating problems. Again, nothing I saw was ever documented. Is that true?
No, that's true. Nothing was ever documented, and no performance problems with Chief Joseph have ever been documented at all, because everybody who relied on him and called on him to do things, they found he produced. That is, of course, up until Art DeWert became the interim city manager and started to carry out the preconceived, conspiracy by the council majority to bring him out for any reason or no reason, and hope that the voters and the public just didn't care.
Yeah, because like I say, there were other people besides Chief Joseph that got caught up in this situation, if you will. Scott McBride, who was the interim city manager for a while, was excoriated for having a granny flat or something on Airbnb. I mean, it was just so specious, some of these comments, and he's since gone over to the city of Merced and just done an absolutely wonderful job. And again, I thought Chief Joseph was doing a good job, but it just shows you when you go on vacation, man, people start looking around. Well, what about this vote of no confidence the day after they let him go? Isn't that kind of what I would call backwards probable cause? In other words, trying to justify your actions after the cause, after the cat's out of the barn? Well,
yeah, that just gives you an idea of what a bunch of amateurs these folks are, because, again, we know that the work was brought in with this notion that he was going to get rid of Sam. By the way, he was also brought in to do a survey and to analyze the performance of every department head in the city of Atwater. And how many other, excuse me, Casey, but how many other department heads did he review? And the answer is none, zero. He only went after Sam Joseph. And of course, his contrived reason for putting Sam on administrative leave was the no confidence vote that had just been taken. And then after he put him on, administrative leave for that reason, it was like, oops, well, I guess we didn't take the no confidence vote until the next day. And they were supposed to at least announce that they took it earlier so that I could put him on administrative leave. It was all preconceived. It was all a plot. And to let you know what a bunch of amateurs they are, they couldn't even get that one right.
Right. Yeah, I know the timing was a little off. And when we talk about paid leave and unpaid leave, did the city ever have the option to put Sam on unpaid leave if they thought some of these things were very egregious?
Well, the truth of the matter is, if they really thought he was an at-will employee, they probably could have put him on unpaid leave. They could have probably summarily fired him. Just let him go, and never ever kept him on paid leave at all. But I think at the time, before they got this current city attorney in there, they probably had a city attorney who said, if you're going to go down this path, you better keep him on paid leave. I think that's what happened. I'm sure if the current city attorney would have been advising him, he would have said, well, do whatever you want to do. Just go ahead and put him on unpaid leave. That's fine. But I think the former city attorney probably gave him the advice to keep him on paid leave.
Well, as you know, they've that's some more changes the city of Atwater went through. They had Tom Terpstra over there of Terpstra and Associates, and they were kind of chastised for having some high monthly bills, and folks thought they were out of line, and so they really didn't even go out to an RFP. They just suddenly Doug White was presented before the Council of Churchwell White. Have you had any dealings with this law firm in the past with other cities or other cops that you've represented?
Well, the answer is no. I've never dealt with Churchwell White until this case, and I can tell you that our firm, we represent cops throughout Northern California, including out in the Central Valley, and, they are not a prominent firm at all that is hired by cities and counties that I think are responsible and are, understand who the good firms are, frankly. And so I've never dealt with them before, and I know now why probably other cities and counties don't hire them, because I don't think they know what they're doing. I don't think they understand the law. I don't think they give good advice. And I think cities and counties that want objective, fair, and good lawyers that will give them good legal advice are going to stay away from a firm like this.
Do you think they're doing their fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Atwater? In other words, spending the money correctly on this litigation? Have they been decent with you in your interactions with them, or are they just trying to run up charges?
Well, look, whether they're trying to run up charges or not, they're running up a lot of charges. And the answer is, what I can say is this about them, is that I think that the lead attorney over there is doing exactly what the council majority wants him to do. I think he came in there and he said, what do you want me to do? And they said, we need to get rid of Sammy so that we can bring in Cindy Vieira's husband to be the chief, and you've got to help us arrange that and orchestrate that. And rather than the city attorney saying, well, wait a minute, you have to understand that Chief Joseph has certain due process rights under the law, and you can't fabricate an investigation. It has to be fair and thorough according to the California Supreme Court. Instead of doing that and telling them what they shouldn't do and what they can't do, we've got a city attorney who's saying, what do you want to do? And I'll facilitate it any way I can. And, as an attorney, you can't do that. I can't tell you how many times every week I'm telling my clients, no, excuse me, I tell my clients every week, you can't do that. We won't do that because the law doesn't permit it. And, a lot of times clients don't want to hear that. And that's the duty of a lawyer, is to say to their client, here's what the law says we can and can't do. We're not going to go down that road. And I've never seen that from this firm. They've just essentially tried to orchestrate the scam that's going on with Sam Joseph.
Well, I know that their bills hey boy, my board's working again. I know their bills are upwards of $600,000-$700,000, may even top $1 million in a year. Who knows where it's going to go? But we talk about some of the options open to Sam. Some people may or may have not heard the POBR, the Police Officers Bill of Rights. Sure. Again, sounds like there's some question whether Sam was an at-will or employee or not. But wasn't there any kind of movement on the city to try to negotiate this, to try to come to a amicable parting of the ways, or maybe even bring Sammy back on if there was discipline necessary? Was there any of that, arbitration, anything like that?
I will say this much. I had said in another article that was published, I know in the community a while back, that the best thing the city could do then, and the investigation, quote unquote, of Sam Joseph was underway at the time, and I said to another reporter, the best thing they could do would be to hire, the city attorney would agree to this, to hire an ethical, capable mediator who would meet with both sides, hear arguments on both sides, and then make a recommendation as to the best course of action, either that Sam Joseph leave employment, that the city pay him a fair sum of money to do that, or that Sam Joseph be returned as the police chief under certain conditions. And I was perfectly willing, and so was Sam, to have a neutral mediator who has no ties to either party hear arguments and evidence from both sides, whatever either side wanted to say, and make that recommendation. The city had no interest in that. They wanted to orchestrate an investigation and control the investigation and control the appeal process that they were going to give Sam once they fired him, because they didn't want him to get a fair hearing. They didn't want somebody that would be fair and objective. They've never wanted that.
Yeah, I just don't understand that. It seems like the fix has been in for some time, and I guess when you start to connect the dots, it really does make a lot of sense. What does, and I don't know if you can speak to this, I don't know if you know what Sam wants, but does he want to come back to the city of Atwater?
You know what? He keeps telling me he does because he lives there, and he loves Atwater, and he loves Atwater PD. And, I'm not going to, I guess, share a whole lot of attorney-client stuff, but I will tell you this, that if I have any client who is treated as shabbily as the city of Atwater has treated Sam Joseph, you can darn well bet I'm telling him, you can't want to work there.
Right.
If any employer has treated you the way you've been treated, you shouldn't want to work there. It is a horrible place to be. And that's what I feel about Atwater.
Yeah, I think the well has been pretty well poisoned, and I think that's probably Sam's not the only city employee that feels that way, and there have been others I know that have been caught up in this mess, and it's just really sad for a city like Atwater to lose an asset in an officer like Sammy Joseph, because again, personalities are one thing, and we can say we don't like somebody because of their personality, but I think his job performance, and I'm not saying his personality is untowards, but I haven't seen anything in his personality or his job performance that warrants the kind of treatment he's been subjected to for the past year.
No, particularly, when you make decisions, personnel decisions, you should be making them on job performance. That should be objective criteria. And I understand personality and subjective factors can also enter into it to some extent,
sure,
although they probably shouldn't.
That's right.
But clearly, from an objective standpoint, from an educational standpoint, from an experience standpoint, Sam Joseph is without question the most qualified individual to lead that department. I can't believe that when they put him on leave that they had Armando Echeverria become the police chief, who had an AA degree, had no educational qualifications or background,
right?
And that's just another sign of what I consider to be the amateur way that the city has handled this from the get-go.
Well, and you look at the individual that you mentioned, he had been in the saddle as long as Sammy, if not longer, in law enforcement, and hadn't taken those opportunities to improve himself, to get the education that Sammy had to make him qualified as chief. We saw this in Lori Waterman, where they had to lower the standards to get somebody in the position. It just seems like backwards engineering to me, and not the right way to run a railroad, especially a city in the financial straits that Atwater is in. And it's again, I've defended Sammy quite a bit on these airwaves because I haven't seen any misconduct. Again, when you, as you alluded to, when you're a supervisor and you make those decisions, and maybe somebody was promised a promotion, well, that person's not qualified. That's going to upset people, but that doesn't mean you crucify the chief. This is what I don't understand.
Yeah. No, look, this has been, as I keep saying, this has been a preconceived plan to get Sam Joseph out, no matter what, and they've tried to pull out all the stops to do it. To the tune of course, bringing him to work to begin with. That was all the initial stages. Then, of course, that fell apart when, lo and behold, an objective background investigator found out all this dirt on him. And then after that falls apart, then they bring in their hired gun investigator to tell them what they want to hear, and she does a superficial investigation that doesn't hold up under the light of day, and then they try to fire him, and then they come up with an appeal procedure that doesn't meet the requirements of the law and tell me he's got to do that. None of this works. And see, what they tried to do is they tried to orchestrate his demise, and they made up the rules as they went. And the problem is we are now at a position where they can't keep making up the rules. We're going to court, and they're going to have to comply with state law on the type of appeal hearing they hold for Sam, and they want nothing to do with that, because that means they're going to have to actually produce evidence that he did something wrong, and they know they're in trouble, and they are. They're in deep trouble.
So the reasons given by Lori Waterman in terminating Sammy at the end of, I guess it was right around Thanksgiving, those don't hold any water in your opinion?
No, they're a joke. They have no support. They have no factual support. They have no legal support. But, of course, Lori Waterman was a brand-new interim city manager who they brought in, and, she's an at-will employee, and she had to play ball, so she had to sign the notice of termination that they prepared. This is Churchwell White preparing the notice of termination that she just signed because, if she didn't sign it, they'd fire her too. So, and then they offered him this absolutely joke of an appeal procedure that is contrary to state law. And then they wanted to hire what they said was a neutral hearing officer, and they admitted that he's entitled to a neutral hearing officer in a letter to me.
Right.
They said that. They said, we want him to have a neutral hearing officer. So we decided to hire the neutral hearing officer at our own expense, and here is who it is. And they hired a guy who would tell them exactly what they wanted to hear because they were paying his bill. And I said, no. Why don't we, if we want to have a neutral hearing officer, why don't we do it from a list of professionals submitted by the state of California that we do all the time with other law firms throughout the state? When we select neutral hearing officers, there is a recognized statewide procedure for doing it. Both sides bear the cost equally of paying this neutral hearing officer, and why don't we do it like we do throughout the state? And you know what? They said they had no interest in that.
Yeah, well,
they were gonna hire and pay themselves the neutral hearing officer who would, of course, uphold Sam Joseph's termination. That's what a joke and a farce this whole procedure has been.
Kind of like the expert witness that whoever pays for them, they're going to give the testimony that person wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I don't know why they thought that I would be so ignorant to allow that to occur, but apparently they did.
Well, you've again, I think, ran up against some amateurs here, because it sounds like the gang that can't shoot straight. Everything has been thought about after the fact, how we can justify putting Sammy on leave, how we can smear his reputation by these accusations that aren't true about this property room. Just going back there for a moment, there's been some, as you know, some of the folks that have been reporting on this have been muzzled. To be polite about it, which really surprises me. I thought this kind of thing only went on the East Coast, in the Windy City, in the big city, in the Big Apple. I'm surprised it's out here on the West Coast, but maybe I shouldn't be. But anyway, there was some folks that have been muzzled. They came out with some information on this preliminary DOJ report about the property room, and we've been told by the city, Chief Bessinger, which again I used the term loosely, Chief, in his regard, because I think he's been anything but. Some of these emails that have been released by Frank Johnson, and again, folks, I'm trying to figure out which side of the fence Frank Johnson is, because he's not making the current council, and I mean the one that was just sworn in, look too good. When you start sending the sheriff over to do your dirty work, what is that all about? Are you familiar with that email?
Yeah, well, I've seen it. It's been a few days since I've looked at it, so I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I did see it, yeah.
Well, I got a little off track, but this Department of Justice report, do you think we're going to see that where it really tells what's going on over there in the evidence room?
I don't know. I don't know who's doing it. I don't know who's controlling it. I have to tell you, I don't have a whole lot of faith in anything that is being engineered or generated by the city of Atwater. And let me say this. I have represented, as I said before, I've represented law enforcement officers and law enforcement agencies. We currently have over 300 different law enforcement clients, association clients, from Crescent City down to San Diego. And so I've seen the operation of cities and counties throughout the state of California. And I have to tell you, in representing cops and chiefs and managers for 38 years, I don't think I've ever seen anything as corrupt as what I've seen in Atwater in the last year. That's the truth.
That's saying a lot, guys. This is a lawyer, Mike Raines, who's been doing this since 1980. He was a cop. And did you hear what he said? He hasn't seen corruption in a city. He's gone from Crescent City all the way down to San Ysidro, El Centro, and he hasn't seen this in his career. This should worry the citizens of Atwater because, Mike, I don't know how much time you spent there in Atwater. It's a nice little town. It was an Air Force town. They had the base there. The base left us in the 90s. That was very unfortunate. And, economically we've struggled. But Atwater has always been a little jewel over there. They've somehow made it through. Their people are just salt of the earth. They're in touch with their community. They're 4th of July. And I have not seen a community split, divided. The rancor among friends. It's almost, I don't want to use the term civil war, but it reminds me of those kind of relationships we saw during that time in America.
Yeah.
And when you talk about corruption, why is this going on? It has to be bigger than Chief Joseph.
I can't answer that question because I have not been part of Atwater and Atwater politics in the past. The only thing I can tell you is I have been part of them ever since assuming the representation of Chief Joseph, and I have been aghast at what I've seen and at the arrogance, the absolute arrogance and the indifference to the law that the city council and the current city attorney has engaged in ever since I've been involved in the case. It's mind-boggling to see what's happened here.
Well, I know that I've taken a lot of your time, Mike, and again, it's late on a Friday night, and I appreciate you so much for coming on. But just to follow up, where do we go from here? What do the citizens of Atwater need to know? What's going to happen with Sammy going forward? You said you're taking this to court. This is a civil matter, I take it?
Yep. Yes.
Is it something we're going to see progress on? Is it going to take years and years of litigation?
Well, we hope not. I will tell you that we have just filed, as of yesterday, we filed in the Merced County Superior Court what's called a writ of mandate to ask the court to order the city of Atwater to provide Sam Joseph an appeal hearing from termination that is consistent with the statutory and the case law that exists around the right of police chiefs to an appeal. And what that means is our writ says Chief Joseph is entitled to an appeal hearing where the city has to prove up each and every one of its charges. And the city has to call witnesses in order to do that. And they have to give me the right to cross-examine those witnesses. And, of course, the city wants nothing to do with that. They never wanted anything to do with that because they know they can't prove their charges if they're put to it, and they don't want to call witnesses because they've already told most of their witnesses that they would never have to testify, so they could go ahead during their interviews and say anything they wanted because they'd never be called on the carpet and they'd never be cross-examined about that. And, of course, that means they lied to their own witnesses to extract from them testimony that they thought would be favorable to them and harmful to Sam. Well, we're asking the court to, in fact, say to the city, no, you're never going to get away with that because case law in California is clear you can't do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to get him a full, what we call an evidentiary hearing, where the city has to call witnesses and prove up its charges. And you know what, when that happens, they're never going to be able to do it. And their witnesses are going to get crucified and buried, and their case is going to fall apart. And hopefully the public will pay attention to the scam and the farce and the sham that has been perpetrated on them for well over a year by the city council.
And at quite a cost, I imagine.
An enormous cost.
I know that
it's a completely unnecessary cost.
Right.
The real losers here. I mean, Sam is a loser because of the way they treated him after his dedicated service to the department and the city. He's a loser, no question about it. But the real losers are the taxpayers who are footing the bill, this enormous attorney fee bill for this law firm that is pillaging city finances, and lining its own pockets on something that should have never happened. That's the real loser are the taxpayers.
Well, and I imagine if Sammy prevails, there will be another attorney that will be paid, and that's probably yourself.
Well, we're asking in the writ, we're asking that the city pay damages under the law, statutory damages to Sam for malicious and intentional violation of his rights. That's available under what's called the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, and we are asking for that, and we're asking that our attorney's fees be paid as well. That is also available under the Bill of Rights. I'm sorry that we've had to go to this measure to have to file a lawsuit to enforce the rights that are clear and unambiguous for Sam to appeal his termination. But you see, the city wanted nothing to do with that because they had wanted to orchestrate his termination from the get-go, and this was just part of them making up rules as they went. It's a sad, sad commentary on a city government gone awry and their city attorneys who won't put them in check. That's what we're dealing with.
And I assume at this point, Sammy is bearing the cost of his legal representation. He
is, and I'm sure Sammy's happy about this. The cost that he's bearing from me is probably about 1/20th, maybe 1/50th of what the city's attorneys are charging the city. Because the last thing in the world I want to do is to get rich at the expense of Sam Joseph. I mean, I've got plenty of other work. I've got plenty of other clients. I don't need this. I really, I'm annoyed that the city is making him and me do this. It's a sad saga, but I guarantee you that I don't feel good about. I don't feel good about billing Sam Joseph, 1 penny
right.
For my work because of the way that he's been treated. I mean, obviously, I make a living too.
Sure.
I'm going to send him some bills, but I guarantee you, and Sam knows this, that the bills I send him are nothing compared to the bills that the city attorneys are sending to the city of Atwater on a monthly basis.
Well, I just want the listeners to know that, Sam, even though he's been an employee for a year and he's been fighting this, the cost is on him. He's trying to defend his reputation. He's trying to defend his good name in the city of Atwater, in the state, with the FBI. Because again, as a cop, all you have is your reputation. If you lie, if you do something, assault under the color of authority, it's over. It's over. And I can tell you, Sammy is not the kind of officer, to go to Quantico, to do this extra education. He's not like an Echeverria that's just putting in the time, that needs to be, helped over the hump to be able to be acting chief. No, Sammy's taken the initiative, and he's taking the initiative in this to pay his legal fees. Now, I know you probably can't talk to the specific charges that Lori mentioned in her termination letter, but are they numerous charges? Are they voluminous? Or they're obviously not something that's been documented to this point where the public would know. They weren't something that was ever put in his personnel record prior to this letter that Lori wrote, right?
Right. No, that's true. No, the charges are not, I wouldn't say they're voluminous. They are, there's over 10 charges that they have alleged as a basis for termination. But I will tell you that the charges are laughable. They're absolutely a farce. They will never withstand the scrutiny of an objective hearing officer, which the city knows, which is why they wanted to hire their own hired gun to hear the appeal so that they could orchestrate the final decision.
Right.
And they know that, and I know that. They're laughable. These are charges that are laughable, but they sort of tried to throw the kitchen sink in, even though they didn't allege any misconduct about the evidence room, really.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other what I call nickel and dime charges that are absolutely unprovable, and I keep coming back to it, and laughable. That's what we're dealing with on appeal, and that's why I say we're more than happy to let the city prove them up because they can't, and if they could, and if a objective hearing officer said, okay, you prove that, well, you know what that's worth? That's probably worth, talking to the chief and saying, Chief, why don't you change this procedure from here on in?
Right.
It's not worth any discipline.
Right.
It's not worth anything at all. And that's the nonsense we're dealing with here in this case.
Well, having been on a big department with the San Diego Police Department, our P&P's policy and procedure manuals are probably 3 inches thick printed out. And I've had a lot of my fellow officers tell me, Casey, those things are there to screw you, not help you when it's discipline time. And you can find something in there, paragraph 5B, subsection 8, you should have turned that third copy of the fish slip in, and maybe you put it in the wrong bin. And as you said, there may be things that procedurally a T wasn't dotted or an I wasn't crossed, but this doesn't rise to the level of criminality where we have our sheriff saying that there's guns, money, and drugs missing, because I hear that's not true.
No.
And so when we talk about these petty, these fabricated issues that were made to justify, again, backwards PC, how can we justify our actions? They're so specious that any arbitrator is going to see right through this, and this is where we're headed.
Well, that's what we look forward to. I mean, you would think if the city really felt that they really, really had proof of some serious misconduct by Sam Joseph, they would be more than willing to say, you know what, let's put this to a neutral hearing officer selected by joint agreement of the parties and paid equally by the parties, because we know that when we are called upon to prove this case, we're going to do it, and Sam Joseph is gone. If a city is confident that they have proven their case, they have no problem with that procedure, but the city of Atwater doesn't want anything to do with that, because they know where this case is going to go. And the case against Sam Joseph goes in the toilet if they are put to the obligation to bear the burden of proof. They don't want anything to do with that.
Some of the things I've heard from some folks is, hey, we don't have anything to worry about. So what if it's specious? We have insurance. If we're found liable, the city insurance policy pays it off. What do you think? I mean, I don't know if you've heard that argument in this case, but I have.
Well, I'm sure the city of Atwater, like most, is self-insured up to a certain point. I don't know what that point is. And they probably have excess carriers, excess coverage carriers, that will insure them up to an amount much larger than that. The problem with that idiotic argument is that the city of Atwater pays those insurance carriers a premium to provide the excess coverage. And when a insurance carrier, an excess carrier, has to see a case like this and sees the way the city's acted in this case to subject themselves to the potential liability they've done with Sam Joseph, you know what's going to happen? The excess carrier is either going to raise their premiums so much that it's going to bankrupt the city, or they're simply going to bail out and say, we're no longer going to insure the city of Atwater because you folks are a bunch of idiots, and we're not going to run the risk of paying the liability claims that you're creating. And either one of those things is going to happen here, because excess carrier insurance companies aren't stupid, and they're not going to, continue to do excess coverage on a city like Atwater when they've acted like they have here.
Yeah, I would think so. Again, the fiduciary responsibility, I think, applies to the council people. And if they think they're pursuing something that doesn't have a snowball's chance, so to speak, that not really being carrying out your fiduciary responsibility. I think that the city council shouldn't just rely, on their quote unquote their insurance that's going to get them out of this.
No.
So again, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on. I've had Mike Raines, who's the attorney for Sam Joseph. He's was the chief of police over there at the city of Atwater, has been there many, many, many years. He was a chief for a couple of years. I was going back through some of the Sunstar articles, and it was just 2 years ago that Frank Petro elevated him to the chief's position. And again, it's been a tough road for Sammy. The things I can't imagine personally, his family, the things that he's gone through. Again, Atwater was such a tight-knit community, and to see these things going on not just with Sammy, but with other folks, is just very disturbing. Mike, I know you've been representing cops a lot, and, as you say, some of these things take years. I know reading the PORAC magazine, which is a little publication put out there by the state, they kind of summarize some of these lawsuits, where they go back and forth. And it amazes me how the municipalities almost seem to shoot themselves in the foot. They can see the handwriting on the wall, yet they continue with litigation. That to be true?
Well, in some cases, and again, largely that's dependent on the attorneys who advise the municipality. If they have responsible, knowledgeable attorneys, those attorneys will find a way to end the litigation and avoid the continuing bleeding of money in both the litigation and the payment of attorney fees. If you have attorneys advising the municipality who are really enjoying lining their own pockets with the city's money, then this can go on forever, and the attorneys get rich, and the city declares bankruptcy because the cities have bled them dry, or the lawyers have bled them dry. That's what I see happening in Atwater.
It's very, very sad. It's really sad for the city. Again, when we talk about oversight and, the insurance companies worry about, folks not really fighting as hard as they should. I would look at the Joint Legislative Audit Committee up there, the state. I would think they would be kind of disappointed in some of the things Atwater's been doing, the missteps, hiring, having 2 chiefs on the payroll, that sort of thing. Now this potential litigation. So maybe we'll get some relief from Sacramento that'll step in, the voice of reason, if you will. When you talk about corruption in the city that you've seen in your career, and again, a 38-year career, folks, it almost begs, instead of sending Sammy to the FBI Academy, should the FBI Academy be here? And I somewhat wonder if some more investigation isn't warranted. Mike, Mr. Rains, I really appreciate you coming on my show, Citizen Watch. Like I say, there's not much media here left in Merced County that hasn't been chastised. Who knows what will happen to me after this show airs? But I hope that you will come on again and talk with me as you feel necessary. These airwaves are open to you. I feel that it's getting the other side out because, again, as you know, in personnel matters, especially when it comes to law enforcement, things have changed in the last 30 years. I don't know if I could be a cop anymore. With Facebook, you're guilty before you hit the substation. It's a different world. We have vilified law enforcement. I think that's wrong. I think we need the thin blue line. We are the last centurions against anarchy, and it's just disappointing to see cops treating other cops like this. And I'm glad that you're defending Sammy Joseph.
Well, thank you, Casey. It's a great honor and a pleasure to represent Sammy. I really hope that this case can get resolved. Of course, we're turning to the Superior Court in Merced County for justice because the city had no interest in it. And, look, the bottom line here is the delivery of good, efficient, effective police service to the citizens of Atwater. They deserve it. They deserve nothing less than that. And all of this stuff has stood in the way of that. And that's the sad thing. I mean, we spent a lot of money of the taxpayers that didn't need to be spent, and the delivery of police services has been affected. This needs to be done for the sake of the citizens on both fronts, and I hope we get there. I'm really looking forward to it. But Sam Joseph, simply under the law, under the facts, has never deserved to be treated this way. This is a shame. And I'm sure that a Superior Court judge will agree with us on that.
Well, I look forward to seeing what happens in this case. I've been following it very closely. Again, Mr. Rains, I hope that you feel free to come on my show again. Just give me a call. We'll set it up. I hope that we hear from you sooner than later. Give Sammy our best. Again, it's hard to communicate with him. We don't see him at the city council meetings anymore. But there are a lot of people, I think, behind him that understand what's going on, and I appreciate you shedding some light on that, and I hope you'll come on my show again.
I certainly will, Casey. I'll be looking forward to it as we get closer to or get some justice from the Superior Court. I'm looking forward to the opportunity.
Well, I've had Mike Rains from Rains, Lucia, Stern, St. Phal, and Silver, a professional corporation, 38 years of experiences. He was on the Santa Monica PD.
Yes, that's right.
Santa Monica PD. He represents officers from north to south, all of California. This guy knows what he's talking about. I think it's been a fascinating interview. Thank you very much for appearing with me.
Thanks for the opportunity, Casey. I really appreciate it.